information technology job function can get paired up with a seniority level. So a seniority level, like in this particular case, would be CXO, some other really senior decision-making seniority levels that you can use on both Sales Navigator and Campaign Manager includes.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI and the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. Many companies in the data center industry have realized that the way that CTOs, Chief Technology Officers, and CIOs, Chief Information Officers, the way those folks have researched and make purchase decisions, that's completely changed relative to the way those C-level executives have historically done so. Gartner, for example, found that 83% of these purchase decisions now are happening before a potential buyer like a CTO or CIO engages with a company like yours. And McKinsey discovered that 70 to 80% of decision makers now prefer to make decisions digitally, while at the same time LinkedIn, partnering with Edelman, concluded that thought leadership remains critical to customer engagement, but breaking through the noise is harder than ever. Now, despite the findings, most companies in and around the data center industry are not prepared to confront this change in purchasing behavior. And this change is approaching really quickly, really fast. Whether your company is prepared or not, you really need to adapt. To help you and your team upskill and stay relevant to how CTOs and CIOs want to buy data center related technology, facilities, construction, real estate, and services, we hosted a webinar a little while back on how to market and sell to CTOs and CIOs for data center go-to-market professionals. In this episode of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, excerpted from that webinar, you'll learn how to integrate your sales process into the daily routines of CTOs and CIOs. You'll learn how to quantify the total addressable market for different roles within different kinds of companies. You'll see how you can size up your data center related technology and services and how this fits in with CTOs and CIOs' biggest challenges, growth trends, industry opportunities, and technology gaps. You'll learn how to adapt your sales process to support CTOs and CIOs' buying process, plus how to jumpstart your go-to-market to achieve more sustainable product market fit and go-to-market fit, and much more. But before we jump in, to make sure that you get notified about upcoming episodes of this podcast, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at DCSMI.com. So, what are we waiting for? Let's get started.
Welcome to How to Market and Sell to CTOs and CIOs, Chief Technology Officers and Chief Information Officers. This webinar is for data center marketers, sales professionals, customer success, CS professionals, product professionals, and channel partnership professionals in and around the data center industry. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I'm thrilled to have you with us for today's webinar. I help go-to-market teams within the data center industry differentiate, get found much earlier on in the buyer's journey in the sales cycle, achieve trusted advisor status, and command premium pricing power to drive sustainable, profitable revenue growth. I've given highly rated educational talks at some of the industry's most popular conferences and trade shows. I've served on the boards of a handful of different IT-related organizations and product and channel marketing-related organizations. I'm a former contractor for IBM and Microsoft, was involved with the HubSpot Solutions Partner ecosystem for about a decade, and co-led a HubSpot user group for 4 years. I bring over 20 years of experience in working in and around go-to-market, digital marketing, and sales enablement for co-location and wholesale data centers, construction, cooling, cybersecurity, infrastructure, decommissioning, IT asset and disposition, a lot, 12, 15 years in and around managed services, IT consulting. That's actually how I originally got into working with co-location providers. Dozens of different software companies, including infrastructure management, monitoring. Got a jump start on AI SaaS about 5 years ago, being in the right place at the right time, as well as custom software development, and spend most of my career, at least one Kevin Bacon away from the telecommunications industry. So DCSMI is all about elevating the role of sales and marketing professionals and go-to-market teams in and around the data center industry. What is on the agenda for today's webinar when it comes to how to market and sell to CTOs and CIOs? First, we're going to talk about how to get up to speed on what actually is going on in the marketplace with chief technology officers and chief information officers, their roles, the differences between the two, their motivations, their earnings power within the industry. And we're going to look at some very specific numbers to give you an idea of what the addressable market, the total addressable market, what some people call TAM, is in terms of being able to reach CTOs and CIOs. We'll talk about what you can do to prepare you and your team to interact more effectively with CTOs and CIOs in today's marketplace. And I'll introduce you to buyer persona CTO CIO Oscar, so you can get a feel for what Oscar's motivations are and how we can make ourselves relevant to what's going on in Oscar's daily routine. And then we'll wind down with a look at some recommended resources. And I'll also have some time towards the end of today's webinar for some question and answer time. We got some great questions that were sent in ahead of time as people registered for the webinar when we asked you, what is your biggest sales and marketing challenge? So I put those into a word cloud. I put those into GPT and I got back. So we heard things like getting in front of the right people or decision makers, lead generation and closing sales, identifying new opportunities, marketing and raising awareness, as well as overcoming fear of technical issues. So towards the end of today's webinar, I'll be addressing those. And if there's additional questions that you have, feel free to drop those into the chat pane, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. So let's first start by talking about the role of the chief technology officer, at least how MIT defines it. Besides making critical decisions along other members of the company's leadership team, like in finance and operations and sales and marketing, compliance, whatever the business model is, a CTO develops their IT policy so everything runs smoothly. Well-versed, well-prepared CTO knows all about road mapping and development. They spend a lot of time on innovation, leadership, of course, AI and machine learning. Of course, cybersecurity comes up, cloud, DevOps, budgeting, amongst a variety. There's a lot on their plate. So to the extent that you and your company are able to add value to helping the CTO, the CIO better do their job, the easier it is for you to get time on their radar screen, get time on their calendar. What are the big differences between CTOs and CIOs, at least as far as like TechTarget's got a really good definition of this, but the big thing to keep in mind is this is going to vary quite a bit depending on the company. It's going to vary quite a bit depending on their size, their industry, their location, but at least in mid-market and enterprise companies with higher budgets for bigger executive teams, the C-level may include both a CTO and a CIO. In smaller companies and the low end of the mid-market, it's rare that you would see both of those roles unless they're very technology intensive. But both positions tend to focus on engineering, implementation, development, and management of IT. However, when there's a split, usually the biggest split in many cases, at least as far as TechTarget has found, is the internal versus external stakeholders. Like a CIO will tend to work more internally, whereas a CTO will more work externally. And again, this is going to be all over the map, depending on where the company is located, the nature of their business, their industry, their size, who they sell to, whether they're channel, whether they're distribution intensive, whether they're IT intensive. But again, the CTO position often overlaps with the CIO, sometimes even a handful of other roles that we'll look at when we get into the addressable market estimates in a few minutes. But depending on the size and focus, it may have some or all of these positions. And the CTO may get involved in infrastructure. Obviously, we're talking specifically about CTOs looking at data center related products and services. So we know digital infrastructure is very, very high on their list. They're in most cases going to be super interested in talking about what's top of mind with us right now, like cooling and edge and retrofitting CPU to GPU data centers, and all the sustainability concerns that come up. But as a rule of thumb, CTOs tend to report to the CEO, but there's some weird edge cases also sometimes where a CTO will report to finance, a CFO. In terms of the relative popularity of these terms, when people are searching, this is Google Trends, when people are searching for the acronyms as opposed to spelling out the full words, there's a lot more interest in people searching for the acronyms just because they're shorter, right? So CTO and CIO in general have way more monthly searches than spelling out the words Chief Technology Officer and Chief Information Officer. And as you can see up there on the screen, the CIO is the green line and the CTO is the red line. So actually, even among the acronyms, CIO is actually searched for more often over the past 12 months, at least in the US on Google, than CTO. So this will give you an idea of the relative popularity. Now, when the CTO and the CIOs say they're busy, they have a lot going on, their time's worth a lot, they're not getting that their time's worth a lot. They actually are very highly compensated. And it depends on who you ask, but at least in the US, when it comes to places like Glassdoor, Salary.com, Indeed, and ZipRecruiter, the ranges tend to be somewhere between 166,000 annual salary on the low end US dollars, all the way up to a little over 300,000 with Glassdoor and Salary.com having pretty close consensus. How does that differ with the CIO type of salaries? Well, Glassdoor is the most optimistic. They're seeing a $332,000 annual US salary, where ZipRecruiter, Salary.com, and Indeed are more in the low to mid 100,000 range. So again, when they're giving you pushback that their time is worth a lot and there's a lot on their plate, and maybe you should talk to some other stakeholders that are on their team first before you get to them, there's a lot to navigate here. When it comes to the priorities for CIOs, and of course, you're going to want to validate how these particular priorities intersect with your product capabilities, your product roadmap. But at least as far as CIO.com is concerned, it's a well-known trade publication that's been around for decades. CIOs are focused on resiliency, improving alignment, rationalizing technology, aligning on business goals, monetizing data, digital transformation. Cyber defense is huge. I struggle to understand why it's not one or two on the list and down at number 7, and preparing to do more with less. That's been a constant theme as we've seen a major shift in the capital markets in the last 12, 24 months. Joe McKendrick, columnist for Forbes, in terms of what CIOs are paying attention to with data analytics and AI. Most CIOs have found that their role is becoming more digital and innovation focused. The majority, 70%, anticipate that cybersecurity is going to increase over the next year or so. I wouldn't be surprised if that figure is up to 100% by now, and just the way the world is moving. And just over half, 55%, anticipate a lot more involvement in data, compliance issues, AI, and machine learning. Gartner looks at CIOs just a little bit differently. CIOs are spending time on financial impact. They're spending time on figuring out the metrics and the interdependencies within the company. And again, as TechTarget, this is a common theme that we've seen with both TechTarget and Gartner, focusing on inner workings within the mid-market or enterprise company as opposed to external-facing IT issues. CIO spending a lot of time on talent recruiting, talent development, to be able to accelerate and prioritize certain digital initiatives, and even finding those talent from unconventional sources. If we've known that's been an issue in and around the data center industry for 5, 6, 7 years, but fortunately, there's some great grassroots movements that have popped up in the last year or two that are doing a tremendous job in getting out to the high schools and colleges and promoting careers in the data center industry. So let's talk briefly a little bit about the addressable market. And this data came directly from LinkedIn Sales Navigator. What most companies in and around the data center industry find is that the CIOs and CTOs, who are going to be your best internal champions, are very digitally focused. So if they're not if they don't at least have a profile on LinkedIn, if they're not at least reasonably active on LinkedIn, they're probably not going to be the best internal champion for you. But in terms of big picture numbers here, and the great part with Sales Navigator, as well, it uses the same database as all of us use when we're using regular LinkedIn, but it also uses the exact same database as LinkedIn Campaign Manager. That's the LinkedIn ad system. So regardless of whether you're trying to attract the right CTOs and CIOs, generate leads from them, nurture those leads, regardless of whether you're doing like an outbound motion using LinkedIn Sales Navigator, or whether you're using LinkedIn Campaign Manager to do ads, ideally to content that adds a lot of value to them, This will give you a rough idea. So LinkedIn worldwide has 300,000 CTOs that it's inferred by job title, 82,000 of which are in the US, 86,000 are in Europe. In terms of CIOs, about 40% of that number, 120,000 globally, 42,000 in the US, 24,000 in Europe. And then you see a really, really quick drop off to some of the much less popular job titles. The big caveat with all of this is LinkedIn figures this out inferentially through machine learning. There is job title information that it's getting, but it's not quite as structured as you might believe it to be. So there's a lot to be said that as you're doing your outbound campaign targeting strategy, both on Sales Navigator and ads, is to try a lot of different overlapping target mechanisms, and you'll probably reach the right people you want, but don't depend on anyone completely by themselves. But the interesting part when you get to like chief technologist, chief information technology officer, chief science officer, deputy CIO, these are just in the four figures, in the thousands, as opposed to hundreds of thousands. But if you target those people specifically with a really tight message that includes like their job title right in the copy and the text, in the video assets and the image-based assets, that's often where you can find some amazing bargains. The reps that work for LinkedIn that sell advertising will encourage you to do these huge groups. But if you have a pretty limited budget, one of the best things that you can do is get super tight about your targeting. And maybe you do want to run a separate campaign just to assistant chief information officers and just to interim CTOs and interim CIOs. The only caveat with all of that is, but that's actually an interesting question. Anyone know what's the minimum audience size that you can reach on LinkedIn ads through LinkedIn Campaign Manager? I don't have a t-shirt to give away, but I'd be super curious if anyone knows the minimum audience number size that you would have to have if you did a really small targeting. And I'm not suggesting that that's the best place to start, but what I am saying is that if you have a really limited budget, I wouldn't start with targeting 300,000 or 82,000 people at once. I would start with some much smaller bets that are much more targeted on your landing page and your copy and your campaign copy. So yeah, the number actually is 300. That's the minimum number of audience members that you need to target a LinkedIn ad campaign separately. So we looked at job titles. You can also, there's 5 or 6 different ways to target, both with LinkedIn Sales Navigator with ads. Function is another interesting one as well. Function actually is a lot more accurate because people specifically pick their job function as opposed to LinkedIn kind of inferring what's going on. So the information technology job function can get paired up with a seniority level. So a seniority level, like in this particular case, would be CXO, some other really senior decision-making seniority levels that you can use on both Sales Navigator and Campaign Manager includes things like owners, partner, vice president, director, and then you get more mid-management, and then you get more like entry-level, intern, senior contributor kind of things. But again, this gives you an idea of the addressable market with in information technology, C-level executive, 260,000 worldwide, 99,000 in the US, 84,000 in Europe. So those are some things to think about with the differences between CTOs and CIOs, how the responsibilities play out, the compensation levels, and the addressable market you can reach through LinkedIn.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
So next up, I want to talk to you briefly about what you can do to prepare your team for today's buyer. The most important consideration here is that in and around a lot of the data center industry, everyone gets that AI is coming. Everyone gets that there is massive sustainability implications with chips that are running so much hotter that need a lot more energy. Everyone gets that there's short supply of grid capacity and edge is going to become, and low latency is going to become an even bigger issue. However, it's as if you have people selling AI solutions from the back of a horse and buggy from like 100 years ago. It's crazy, but the CTOs and the CIOs, most of the stakeholders that you're selling to, they have dramatically changed how they research and make purchase decisions for data center space and IT and facilities, construction, real estate, sales and marketing services. But a lot of go-to-market teams just haven't kept up. And just to make this more tangible, Gartner found that 83% of the buyer's journey now happens without you. 83% of the researching, comparing options, and decision-making, evaluating pricing is happening before a CTO or a CIO is willing to interact with any vendor. And this is an enormous challenge for an industry that isn't used to this. It didn't come completely out of nowhere. 5-6 years ago, that number was more like 55-60%, but it really, really accelerated during the pandemic. And this isn't edge cases anymore. This is 70 or 80% of CTOs and CIOs, of B2B buyers in general, have these preferences. And the big thing to keep in mind is that when a 75-year-old CTO retires, when the boomers, 10,000 baby boomers a day are retiring, it's very unlikely that anyone that's even remotely digitally resistant is replacing that person. They're almost certainly being replaced by someone that's even more allergic to spending time with sales until the absolute end of the journey. So what can we do to make sure that we stand out? Well, LinkedIn and Edelman, the PR giant Edelman, has done a lot of research around this. And as you might expect, thought leadership and content can make an enormous impact. The challenge is doing webinars, podcasts, ebooks, blogging, videos. This isn't new. Most of the companies that you're competing with for attention have been at these things for 5, 10, 15 years already. So if you're just starting out, it's going to take quite a bit to stand out and cut through the noise. Most firms in the data center industry, frankly, are completely unprepared for this once-in-a-generation change in purchasing behavior, because your best prospects, they're using Google and Copilot and watching streaming videos and asking questions of their coworkers, their peers on social media. They're going to review sites. They're attending webinars like this. Sounds a little meta, but it's pretty realistically part of their buyer's journey. They're listening to podcasts. And of course, they're asking questions on their AI assistants. In many ways, however, a lot of people in the data center sales and marketing space are still spending a ton of time cold messaging people on LinkedIn, begging for 15-minute meetings to pitch products or services. But these changes in buyer behaviors also present huge opportunities for teams and individuals that can reinvent themselves so that they're seen as subject matter experts, teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, and thought leaders, not just a vendor, not just a sales professional, but someone that is giving so much value in the pre-sales process that it feels like they're getting free consulting, like almost like a Big Four consultant. So like I often say that the sales professional of the future, which is basically now, needs to position themselves more like a Big Four consultants. And over in customer success post-purchase, the account managers, the CS, need to be seen as like the PhD or MBA level person, equivalent of the Big Four consultant, where your interactions are so valuable that they feel like they're getting free consulting. So we talked about what's going on with the state of CTOs and CIOs. We talked about what you can do to prepare your team. What can you do to more successfully engage CTO, CIO, Oscar, the buyer persona we're targeting? CTO, CIO, Oscar may work in banking or consumer packaged goods, e-commerce, engineering, financial services, government, healthcare, insurance, manufacturing, media, IT, or telecommunications, any one of 10 or 12 different industries. He tends to be US based, but there's certainly an equivalent of Oscar who operates anywhere in EMEA or Latin America or Asia. We just need to get dialed into who you're specifically targeting in your ICP. In this particular case, we looked at a CTO CIO Oscar in a mid-market company with 426 employees. He's got 9 different goals, 8 different challenges. There's 12 different job title alternatives for people that do similar jobs to Oscar and other companies. Oscar or Oscar's friends and peers in other companies may belong to as many as 47 different LinkedIn groups. They may have skills that cover 83 different areas. Talk about their attention being scattered in a lot of different places. At any given time, Oscar and Oscar's peers consider attending as many as 33 conferences. Obviously, if Oscar went to all 33 of those conferences, he'd never have time to do his real job. So he's going to a handful or 2 of those. But that's what's on his radar screen that he's looking at and that he's seeing his peers go to. And same deal with publications, trade publications, bloggers, newsletters. he's kind of sort of paying attention to as many as 27, maybe more closely paying attention to 5 or 10, but he's learning about those other content sources coming through his social feed from his peers. Now, creating an effective GTM to reach CTO, CIO, Oscar can be really time consuming and really expensive, but it can be make or break for so many companies that sell to CTOs and CIOs. And just to make sure that we're on the same page here, a buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client or stakeholder that you're looking to attract based on actual research and some educated speculation. It can't be all speculation. A lot of times people that are new to this just interview a couple people internally. They say, we've been doing this for decades. We know what Oscar wants. Wrong. Your input is part of it, but it shouldn't even be the majority of it. Because we need to make sure that we get it in their own words and the consensus for their own words. And we're going to, especially if this is a new initiative, we're going to have to pick our battles and prioritize. So we have a primary buyer persona, a secondary buyer persona, maybe a tertiary buyer persona. And when we get really good at our lead qualification, we'll probably have a negative buyer persona also, where we'll make sure that our CRM and our drop-down lists have a choice on there that if they pick that, we don't waste any time because we know we can't serve them well. But overall, the personas are the key to unlocking relevance and great, remarkable content and scaling growth. So that's what I had on the main agenda for today for how to market and sell to CTOs. We talked about first how to get up to speed on what the differences are between CTOs and CIOs in terms of their responsibilities, understanding how they're compensated, understanding the size of the market and the different segments within there that you can reach depending on the job titles, the job functions, the seniorities, the geographic region you're targeting, and how both LinkedIn Sales Navigator and LinkedIn Campaign Manager, LinkedIn Ads can be phenomenally effective at targeting the right people in the right places at the right time, and hopefully with a good thought leadership strategy for the right reason, how to prepare your team for today's buyers, and how to engage with CTO, CIO, Oscar. And with that, I have a few minutes for questions. As I mentioned, we got some great questions that were sent in ahead of time when people registered for today's webinar. So I'm going to start with those first. The first one is in terms of what does it take to get in front of the right people, the right decision makers? This is a great one. And I think a lot of it has to do with being very self-aware about how many different companies, how many different conferences, how many different media companies, how many different channel programs, brokers, all the different people that are competing for Oscar's attention. What can you do to grab Oscar by the virtual shirt collar when he's scrolling through and looking at what you're trying to get in front of him and exude relevance and exude value? Well, it starts with focusing on what's in it for Oscar, not what's in it for you. If you prove yourself, if you prove that you're helpful, if you introduce Oscar to some unique insights that can help him better do his job and better help his company, Oscar may at some point be open to learning about what your company does. But early on, Oscar just knows he's got a big goal that he's trying to figure out. He's got some big challenges that he's struggling with. And if you can be the resource person, you earn the right to enter Oscar's world and have an active role in helping to educate and build trust with Oscar in that first 83% of the buyer's journey, when people have become so allergic to sales that the best way for you to have a presence in that is to be seen as a subject matter expert, a consultant, and a trusted advisor. So again, the question is how to get in front of the right people and right decision makers is focus on what they want first. Add to the bank account before you try to withdraw from the bank account. That's just such an important mindset for the world that we're in right now, where everyone wants to be as self-service as possible. Next question is, what can we do to improve lead generation and close sales when it comes to selling to CTOs and CIOs? Well, the first thing with lead generation is to remember that early on in the awareness and consideration stages of the journey, in that first 83% of the journey, which if you're a sports fan, you might think of as like the first 3/4 of a football game or football match, the first maybe 7 or 8 innings of a baseball game. In the first 83% of that whole process that's going on, the only way we're going to be able to generate leads is if we focus on education, content, thought leadership. If we teach Oscar something that's useful, either for himself or for others on his team, his VP of IT, his head of cybersecurity, his head of network engineering, whoever it is, whether you're getting direct access to Oscar or someone in Oscar's organization, we need to first educate and build trust with them. That's what's going to allow us to generate leads. And then we need a strategy to accelerate those leads into sales opportunities so we can eventually close. And at the risk of sounding a little bit meta relative to the process that brought us together today, you found me, you found DCSMI through some more than likely email marketing or social media marketing or organic search or blogging, some kind of content. And we're curious enough to learn more. And then you got enough value and you're curious enough that you registered for this webinar. So you're kind of in the awareness consideration stage where you're learning. And so the key thing is, if you're looking to apply the same kind of idea to more effectively reaching CTOs and CIOs, think of yourself more as a consultant, a content creator. I'm not telling every salesperson to go out and immediately add podcasting and webinars to their mix, but the reality is, as people are getting more and more adverse to spending time with sales professionals throughout most of the journey, one of the most effective ways to get around that limiting issue, that limiting belief on the part of your prospects, is to be seen as the expert, as the teacher, as the trusted advisor. And people love content, and especially when you're selling to cynical IT buyers who are especially allergic to marketing and sales professionals, we need a way to cut through the clutter with both lead generation and closing more sales. Next question is, in terms of identifying new business opportunities, I think you really, if you're looking to identify more business opportunities with CTOs and CIOs, is first you have to understand your business model and your sales cycle. Like the extreme example would be, like for co-location, if somebody is currently in month 2 of a 36-month co-location contract, it's going to be a long time before they're open to looking at new co-locations. So you need to be aware of those issues. If you're selling things like building a brand new hyperscale data center, you need to be aware of timing issues and all that goes into it from your standpoint. But you also need to get very dialed into your ideal client profile and who your buyer personas are, and develop a deep understanding of the journey that someone like Oscar goes through in between when they first start researching a problem and they start comparing their options and they start becoming open to meeting with different solution partners that can help them solve some of those. You need to really understand that journey and make sure. A lot of the big market research firms now talk about like that there's as many as 28 different touch points that happen between a complete stranger and a purchase decision, 28 different touch points. So what can we do to make sure that we have a presence in as many of those as possible, so we surround them in a way that we're constantly there adding value? That's the way you're going to identify new opportunities, because you're essentially training that person and the decision committee that works with that person to know that you're the one to go to. And the cool part is, when you do content, when you do sales enablement, when you do thought leadership the right way, is it's far more likely that someone is willing to share your content asset long before they stick their neck out and endorse you as a company. So a great ebook, a great downloadable planning template, a great webinar, a great offline event, it's far more likely, when it's a much lower risk proposition, for someone 2 or 3 reporting levels down from the CTO to circulate something around that's highly relevant long before they're making a career betting decision on recommending your company for a large and mission critical kind of investment. So by looking at your targeting, looking at what people explicitly tell you about themselves, and looking at how they interact and behave with your content and events, that can go a very long way to identifying more of the right engagement opportunities with the right people. In terms of marketing data centers and raising awareness of services, when it comes to marketing and selling to CTOs, when it comes to marketing and selling to CIOs, what I tell almost everyone that's new to this is, you traditionally would think of building marketing roles and sales development roles and account executive roles and account management, CS kind of roles. The reality is, to be effective in today's environment where there's such an aversion to spending time with sales until the absolute end, I'd encourage most people, instead of building traditional marketing teams, to think in terms of building a media company within your company that specifically adds a ton of value to a specific buyer persona, one buyer persona at a time. So for example, if I look at your website, or we have a consultation, and you tell me that I want Oscars, and there's 2 different kinds of Oscars that we need to get in front of. We need to get in front of Oscars who are in financial services and Oscars who are in manufacturing. Okay, great. So there's 2 different kinds of Oscars, and there's a really good chance that there's some overlap between the 2 of them. But if you really want to stand out it probably is an entirely different go-to-market and content strategy and events and webinar strategy and podcasting strategy for manufacturing Oscar as compared to financial services Oscar. And the better job you can do about being hyper-specific, deeply niched, exuding a ton of value that's unique that Oscar can't get elsewhere, the more you're going to stand out. So in terms of marketing and creating awareness, focus on getting your segmentation right, focus on personalizing the heck out of content as much as possible. That's going to be one of the positive upsides of AI in the coming years, is it's going to be possible for all of us to do personalization like we've never seen before, except for the likes of like having the resources of Amazon or Netflix or a company like that. But it's going to enable even small and mid-sized companies to be able to deliver much more granular levels of segmentation and personalization that really move the needle on accelerating sales processes. So one more question. Let me see if there's any others in the chat pane that we want to address here. Okay. So the final question is, what can you do to overcome customers' fears of technical issues? So the best way to deal with nervous clients, anxious clients who fears, is to try to infuse your clients into your content and thought leadership. What does that mean? Well, if you have a podcast, where it's possible, interview your clients. If you're doing webinars, where it's possible, involve your clients on webinar panels. If you're hosting your own events or speaking at other people's events, bring your clients. And I recognize that certain industries and certain companies are going to have mandates where they're simply not allowed to publicly endorse your company. So having the logos on your site, having them participate may be completely out of question. But there are some cases in large enterprise companies where they're not allowed to formally endorse, but they can still participate in thought leadership. And you'll know that because when you look at the people that fit in this particular buyer persona, you'll see someone like Oscar frequently speaking at industry events and being on panels and being interviewed in podcasts and speaking at webinars. And when you see Oscar being able to do that, most of the time, as long as they're a happy client, with you, that's a pretty approachable use case. And in many cases, you will be able to get social proof from Oscar participating in your content and collaborative thought leadership long before you can even get them to document into a case study as well. So in terms of nervous prospects, nervous clients, one of the best things that you can do is involve Oscar, involve the CTOs and CIOs and people that work in their organization in content collaborations with your own thought leadership. It's been my pleasure to have you join us today for how to market and sell to chief technology officers and chief information officers. This is specifically for sales, marketing, CS, product, and channel professionals in and around the data center industry. If you have any further follow-up questions, feel free to reply to the recording any questions email that's going to be coming to you shortly. Feel free to also visit us at DCSMI.com, and you'll find a chat bubble on the bottom right-hand corner of most of those pages. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I wish you great success in growing your business by more effectively marketing and selling to CTOs and CIOs. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.